Survival by fire, adaptation and regeneration. There's a moment just after the flames have passed when the forest falls silent. The air hangs heavy with ash and smoke, and everything that was green has turned to charcoal and ember. You might think this is the end of the story, a landscape reduced to ruin. But if you wait, if you watch closely in the days and weeks that follow, you'll witness something extraordinary. From blackened soil, tiny green shoots begin to push upward. Sealed cones that have hung in the canopy for years suddenly split open, releasing thousands of seeds into the ash-enriched earth. Trees that appeared completely dead suddenly sprout fresh leaves from their trunks. And in the smoke-scented air, dormant seeds buried deep in the soil begin to wake from decades of sleep, triggered by chemicals in the smoke itself. This is not destruction. This is transformation. This is life that has learned over millions of years, not just to survive fire, but to need it, to depend on it, to turn catastrophe into opportunity. Welcome to Bedtime Biology, where science meets serenity. Each night, we explore the quiet wonders of the natural world, calming your mind and sparking your curiosity. If you like these videos, please consider subscribing to the channel and commenting below if you have any feedback or suggestions for topics of future episodes. Tonight, we're going to explore one of nature's most paradoxical relationships, the bond between fire and life. We'll discover plants that refuse to release their seeds until flames arrive, trees with bark so thick they can stand in an inferno and emerge unscathed, and underground organs that can send up new shoots even after everything above ground has been incinerated. We'll learn about chemicals in smoke that act like wake-up calls for sleeping seeds, grasses that grow back within days of burning, and animals that have learned to read the language of fire and use it to their advantage. This is the story of adaptation and regeneration, of destruction that leads to renewal, and of ecosystems that have turned one of nature's most powerful forces into a tool for survival. Fire has been part of Earth's story for as long as there have been plants on land. The conditions for fire require three things: fuel in the form of plant material, oxygen in the atmosphere, and a source of ignition. Around 350 million years ago, during a period called the Devonian, the first two conditions were finally met. Plants had colonized the land, creating the first forests of primitive ferns, horsetails, and early seed plants. Photosynthesis had been working steadily for millions of years, pumping oxygen into the atmosphere as a byproduct of converting sunlight and carbon dioxide into sugars. By the Devonian, atmospheric oxygen had reached levels high enough to support combustion, somewhere around 13 to 15% of the atmosphere. Lightning provided the spark. Thunderstorms rolling across those ancient landscapes would have sent bolts crackling down to strike dead wood, dry leaves, anything that could catch and hold a flame. And for the first time in Earth's history, fire became possible. The earliest evidence we have of wildfires comes from charcoal fragments, fossilized pieces of burnt wood found in rocks dating to around 420 million years ago. These tiny black fragments tell us that fire wasn't just possible in theory. It was happening, transforming landscapes in ways that had never occurred before in the billions of years of Earth's existence. But fire didn't just happen to life, it shaped it, as oxygen levels in the atmosphere fluctuated over geological time, rising and falling with the activity of plant life and volcanic eruptions. the frequency and intensity of fires changed too. During the Carboniferous period, about 300 million years ago, oxygen levels spiked dramatically, reaching perhaps 35% of the pulsar atmosphere, far higher than today's 21%. The world during the Carboniferous was covered in vast swamps, filled with giant ferns, club mosses, and early trees. These plants grew rapidly in the warm, wet climate, pulling carbon dioxide from the air and fixing it into their tissues. When they died, many fell into swampy, oxygen-poor water, where they didn't decompose fully. Instead, they were buried and compressed, eventually forming the vast coal deposits we mine today. This massive burial of carbon had a side effect. It removed carbon dioxide from the atmosphere while continuing to produce oxygen. With less carbon dioxide to trap heat, the planet began to cool, leading to glacial periods. But more relevant to our story, the high oxygen levels made the world extraordinarily flammable. Fires during the Carboniferous would have burned with an intensity we can barely imagine today. Even damp wood could catch fire easily. Forest fires would have raged with explosive fury, consuming entire landscapes. The fossil record from this period shows extensive charcoal deposits, evidence of massive wildfires. Some paleobotanists believe that fire was so common during the Carboniferous that it may have been one of the factors limiting the height of forests. Trees that grew too tall would have been more exposed to lightning strikes and might have accumulated more dead, flammable material, making them vulnerable to fire. Natural selection might have favored shorter, more fire-resistant growth forms during this period of extreme fire activity. Then, during the Permian period, about 250 million years ago, oxygen levels began to decline, falling to around 15%. With less oxygen, fires became less frequent and less intense. The planet also underwent dramatic climate changes, with the formation of the supercontinent Pangaea, creating vast inland deserts and seasonal climates. Fire would have been less of a constant pressure during this time, and we see corresponding changes in plant evolution as other environmental factors became more important. But fire returned with a vengeance during the Cretaceous period, roughly 125 million years ago. Oxygen levels climbed again, not as high as during the Carboniferous, but still elevated compared to today, reaching perhaps 25% of the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide levels were also high, creating a greenhouse climate that was warm and wet across much of the planet. Plants flourished in these conditions, and fire flourished with them. This was the age of the dinosaurs, massive reptiles that dominated terrestrial ecosystems. But from a botanical perspective, it was even more significant as the age when flowering plants, the angiosperms, were rapidly diversifying and spreading across the continents. These plants, which would come to dominate modern ecosystems, evolved in a world where fire was common, and fire was there with them, a constant presence, an evolutionary pressure as significant as drought or frost or predation. Flowering plants evolved a dazzling array of strategies to cope with fire. Some developed thick bark to protect their stems. Others evolved the ability to resprout from roots or underground organs after the above-ground parts were destroyed. Still others began storing seeds in ways that protected them from fire and released them afterward, ensuring their offspring would germinate into the post-fire landscape. These adaptations didn't appear overnight. They were refined over millions of years, through countless fires and countless generations, each small improvement in fire resistance providing a survival advantage that was passed on to the next generation. The key insight here is that fire shaped plant evolution not as a rare catastrophe, but as a regular occurrence. In fire-prone regions, plants experienced fire not once in their lifetimes, but many times. A pine tree living 200 years in a forest that burned every 20 years would experience 10 fires. Natural selection favored traits that allowed survival through multiple fire events, not just one lucky escape. This meant that fire adaptations had to be reliable, repeatable, and integrated into the basic biology of the plant. Plants that couldn't survive fire went extinct or retreated to wetter, fire-free refuges. But other plants, through random mutations and natural selection, began to develop traits that allowed them not just to survive fire, but to exploit it. Thick bark evolved to protect the living tissue beneath. Some plants developed the ability to resprout from roots or specialized organs, even after the entire above-ground structure had been consumed. Others learned to store their seeds in woody structures that would only open when heated by flames, ensuring that their offspring would be released into a freshly cleared landscape with abundant light, reduced competition, and nutrient-rich ash. The fossil record preserves evidence of these ancient adaptations. Charcoal fragments found alongside plant fossils tell us that fires were burning in ancient forests. Some fossilized cones show the same serotinous characteristics, sealed with resin, that we see in modern fire-adapted pines. The traits we observe in today's fire-prone ecosystems aren't recent inventions. They're ancient strategies, refined over tens of millions of years, tested and improved through countless generations and countless fires. Different lineages discovered fire adaptations independently. In the southern hemisphere, the family Proteaceae, which includes plants like Banksia and Hakea in Australia and Protea in South Africa, developed elaborate woody seed pods that protect seeds from fire and release them afterward. In the northern hemisphere, conifers, particularly pines, evolved serotinous cones sealed with heat-sensitive resins. These parallel solutions to the same problem, fire, arose separately on different continents, a beautiful example of convergent evolution. The Mediterranean basin, parts of California, South Africa's fynbos, southwestern Australia, and central Chile, all share similar fire-prone climates. And in all of these regions, plants have independently evolved remarkably similar fire survival strategies. Fire shaped not just individual species, but entire ecosystems. Grasslands and savannas, which now cover vast areas of Earth's surface, are maintained by fire. Without periodic burning, many of these open landscapes would transition to closed canopy forests. The grasses themselves are adapted to fire, with growing points located at or below the soil surface, where they're protected from the flames. After a fire, they can regenerate quickly from these protected buds, often sending up new growth within days. The trees that do manage to exist in savannas, species like acacias in Africa or eucalyptus in Australia, have their own fire adaptations. Thick, corky bark, elevated canopies that keep leaves away from surface fires, and the ability to resprout if damaged. This long evolutionary history means that when we look at a forest or grassland that burns regularly, we're not looking at a landscape that tolerates fire as a nuisance. We're looking at a landscape that has been fundamentally shaped by fire, where the presence of fire has become woven into the life cycles, reproductive strategies, and very physiology of the plants and animals that live there. Fire isn't external to these ecosystems. It's intrinsic to them, as much a part of the environment as rain or sunshine. And this brings us to one of the most remarkable adaptations of all: plants that refuse to release their seeds until fire arrives. Imagine a pine cone hanging in the canopy of a lodgepole pine forest in the Rocky Mountains. It's not an ordinary cone. Most pine cones dry out naturally after they mature, their scales spreading apart to release winged seeds that flutter away on the wind. But this cone is different. It's tightly sealed with a layer of resin, a hard, waxy substance that glues the scales shut. Inside are viable seeds, ready to germinate but trapped. The cone might hang there for years, even decades, accumulating in the crown of the tree. 5 years worth of cones, 10 years, 20 years, all sealed shut, all waiting. The resin that seals these cones is produced by specialized cells within the cone itself. As the cone matures, these cells secrete the sticky substance, which flows between the scales and hardens into a seal. The chemical composition of this resin is precisely tuned to melt at specific temperatures. It's not just any wax or resin, it's a specialized compound with a melting point that corresponds to the temperatures typically generated by wildfires in the pine's habitat. Then fire comes. The flames move through the forest, consuming the understory, climbing into the canopy. The heat is intense, hundreds of degrees Celsius, and at a specific temperature, typically between 45 and 60 degrees Celsius for the initial melting to begin. Though some cones can withstand much higher temperatures briefly, the resin begins to soften. The exact temperature required varies between species and even between populations within a species, fine-tuned by natural selection to match local fire characteristics. As the resin melts, it loses its adhesive properties. The cone scales, which have been held shut by this biological glue for years, are now free to move. As the cone heats further and dries, the scales curl back, opening the cone. If the heat passes quickly enough, if the flames don't linger long enough to ignite the cone itself or raise internal temperatures high enough to cook the seeds inside, then what emerges is a perfectly timed seed release. Thousands of seeds rain down from the canopy onto a forest floor that has just been cleared of competing vegetation, enriched with ash, and opened to full sunlight. The timing and durations of heat exposure is critical. Research has shown that cone scales begin to separate at around 50 degrees Celsius, but full opening typically requires temperatures of 70 to 90 degrees. However, if temperatures exceed about 120 degrees for more than a few minutes, the seeds themselves can be damaged. There's a narrow thermal window where the cone opens, but the seeds survive, and evolution has shaped both the cone structure and the resin properties. To maximize the chances of hitting that window during a typical fire, this adaptation, called serotiny, from the Latin word for late, because seed dispersal happens late relative to seed maturation, is found in numerous plant species around the world. In North America, lodgepole pine and jack pine are classic examples. Studies have shown that the proportion of serotinous cones varies between populations based on fire frequency. In areas where fires are common, occurring every 10 to 20 years, trees produce mostly serotinous cones, keeping a seed bank in the canopy, ready for the next fire. In areas where fires are rare, occurring perhaps every 50 to 100 years or longer, trees produce more non-serotinous cones that open normally because waiting for a fire that might not come in the tree's lifetime would be a poor strategy. Researchers studying lodgepole pine across its range, from the Yukon in northern Canada south to New Mexico, have documented this gradient in serotiny. In the northern Rocky Mountains, where stand-replacing crown fires are frequent, serotiny rates can exceed 90%, meaning nearly all cones on a tree remain sealed. In the Sierra Nevada of California, where fires are less frequent and often of lower intensity, serotiny rates drop to 20% or less, with most cones opening normally to disperse seeds annually. The lodgepole pine can demonstrate remarkable adaptation to local fire regimes within the same species. At low elevations in some regions, particularly in northern Idaho, where fires are less frequent and less intense, the trees have developed thick, black, deeply fissured bark and produce mostly open cones. The bark provides fire resistance, allowing trees to survive surface fires. At high elevations in Wyoming and Montana, where fires tend to be more frequent, stand-replacing crown fires that kill all trees, the bark is thinner, almost papery, and bright orange or yellow, and the trees produce predominantly serotinous cones. The evolutionary trade-off is clear. Invest in bark to survive fire, or invest in serotinous cones to reproduce after fire. Different populations have made different choices based on their local fire regime. The ecological significance of this adaptation becomes apparent when you witness post-fire regeneration. In the northern Rockies, researchers have studied sites where mountain pine beetles killed vast swaths of lodgepole pine in the 1930s and 40s. The dead, standing trees accumulated as fuel, creating jackstrawed tangles of fallen timber. When fire finally arrived, in some cases burning 28,000 acres in a single event like the Sleeping Child Fire of 1961 in Montana, the intensity was extreme. Crown fires raced through the dead forest, generating enormous heat. Yet the serotinous cones survived. After the fire, lodgepole pine seedlings established at densities of tens of thousands per acre, creating impenetrably dense young forests. These regeneration rates are possible only because the trees had been accumulating sealed cones for decades. A mature lodgepole pine in a serotinous population might carry several hundred cones, each containing 20 to 40 seeds. Across a stand of hundreds of trees per acre, the aerial seed bank can contain millions of seeds, all released simultaneously by fire. Jack pine, found across Canada and the northern United States, shows similar patterns. Researchers studying these cones have found that they can withstand temperatures up to 360 degrees Celsius for brief periods before igniting. The seeds inside remain viable even when exposed to high heat, as long as the exposure is brief. This is because cones provide excellent insulation. The woody scales and the resin create layers that protect the seeds, and the specific arrangement of tissues means that heat penetrates slowly toward the center where the seeds are located. By the time the inner scales warm enough to potentially damage seeds, the fire has usually passed. In Australia, a completely different group of plants has evolved remarkably similar adaptations. Banksias, members of the Proteaceae family, produce woody fruiting structures, actually modified flower spikes covered in follicles. Each follicle is essentially a hard, woody capsule containing 1 or 2 seeds. These follicles remain tightly closed, often for years, sealed by a combination of woody tissue arrangement and, in some species, reinforced by resins similar to those in pine cones. When fire comes, the intense heat causes the follicles to open through a combination of tissue drying and, in some species, the melting of resins. The follicles split apart along natural suture lines, revealing the seeds inside. The mechanism is elegant in its precision. The follicle is made of two valves that fit together tightly when closed. The outer surface of these valves is covered in a layer of dense, protective tissue. Inside, between the valves, sits the seed chamber. The valves are held together by specialized junction tissue that acts as a hinge and a seal. When fire heats the follicle, several things happen simultaneously. The outer tissue chars, forming a protective crust that insulates the inner seed chamber. The junction tissue dries and contracts, and any resins present begin to melt. The combination of these changes weakens the seal holding the valves together. As the follicle cools after the fire passes, the charred outer layer shrinks, and the inner tissues undergo differential drying. The valves, which had been curved inward to close the follicle, now curve outward, forcing the follicle open. It can take hours or even days after a fire for follicles to fully open, the process continuing as the tissues dry and the mechanical stresses resolve themselves. What's particularly elegant about Banksia is the variety of strategies different species employ across Australia's diverse fire regimes. In the southwestern corner of Western Australia, where some of the world's most species-rich plant communities grow on ancient, nutrient-poor soils, Banksias have diversified into dozens of species, each with slightly different fire strategies. Banksia attenuata, one of the most widespread species, shows remarkable variation across its range. In drier, more fire-prone inland areas, it's strongly serotinous, keeping nearly all seeds locked in follicles until fire arrives. In wetter coastal areas, where fires are less frequent, it releases a higher proportion of seeds spontaneously, hedging its bets between fire-triggered and ongoing seed release. Banksia prionotes, the acorn Banksia, is an obligate seeder that's completely killed by fire, but has strongly serotinous follicles that release massive numbers of seeds after fire. A single mature tree might carry thousands of follicles accumulated over decades, each containing 2 seeds. When fire kills the tree and opens the follicles, this represents a huge pulse of seeds, all released into optimal conditions for germination. The species has essentially put all its reproductive eggs in the fire basket, gambling that fires will occur frequently enough to allow regeneration before the parent trees die of old age. In contrast, Banksia serrata, found along the eastern coast of Australia, can resprout from its thick, woody trunk after fire, and its follicles show weaker serotiny, releasing some seeds even without fire. This gives it multiple options: survive fire and resprout, or release seeds after fire, or gradually release seeds between fires. The flexibility allows it to persist across a wider range of fire frequencies than more specialized species. One of the most fascinating details about Banksia follicles is their internal structure and the mechanism that ensures seeds are released at the right time. Inside each follicle, the seed sits in a chamber with a thin, papery wing attached. This wing, about the length of the seed body, aids in wind dispersal after the follicle opens. But there's another structure called a seed separator, a specialized piece of tissue shaped like a wedge or tongue that sits between the seed and the follicle opening. When the follicle first opens after fire, gravity would normally cause the seed to simply fall out. But the seed separator prevents this. It acts as a physical barrier, blocking the opening, while the follicle valves are only partially open. The seed is held in place, sometimes for weeks. Then, when rain arrives, the follicle tissues absorb moisture and swell. During dry periods between rains, they shrink again. This wet-dry cycling causes the follicle valves to flex, and each time they do, the seed separator acts as a lever, gradually prying the seed forward. Over multiple cycles, the seed is forced out of the follicle and falls to the ground. This means seeds are released not just after fire, but after fire and the first rains, ensuring they land on moist soil ready for germination. The timing is exquisite. If seeds were released immediately after fire, they might land on hot, dry ash and die before rain arrived. By delaying release until moisture is present, the plant improves germination success rates. The seed separator is a beautiful example of how evolution can fine-tune adaptations to match not just the major environmental trigger, fire, but the sequential conditions that determine success. Fire followed by rain. The giant sequoia and coast redwood of California also exhibit serotiny, though not as strongly as lodgepole pine or banksia. Sequoia cones can remain closed on the tree for up to 20 years. When fire heats them, the drying effect causes the scales to open. The cones are serotinous enough that fire greatly accelerates seed release, dumping massive quantities of seed onto the post-fire soil. But they also release some seeds spontaneously, so they're not completely dependent on fire. This flexibility is important because fire intervals in sequoia groves historically ranged from about 5 to 35 years. Being completely dependent on fire could be risky if fires became too infrequent. What's crucial about all of these serotinous species is the timing. Fire creates an ideal environment for seedling establishment, but only if seeds arrive at the right moment. After a fire, the forest floor is covered in ash, which is rich in nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. The canopy has been opened, allowing full sunlight to reach the ground. Competing vegetation has been removed. The soil has been heated, which can kill pathogens and pest insects that might attack seeds or seedlings. And the bare mineral soil, exposed by the removal of the litter layer, provides good seed-to-soil contact, which improves germination rates. But this window of opportunity is brief. Within weeks or months, other plants begin to colonize the site. Grasses, herbs, and fast-growing pioneer species start to cover the ground. If seeds arrive too late, they'll face intense competition. Arrive too early, before the fire, and they either burn or germinate into a doomed seedling in a mature forest with low light and high competition. Serotiny ensures that seeds arrive exactly when conditions are optimal and in large numbers. When tens of thousands of seeds rain down from the canopy after a fire, the landscape can be transformed almost overnight into a dense stand of seedlings. In some lodgepole, pine forests following major fires, foresters have documented seedling densities exceeding 50,000 per acre. These dense thickets, called dog hair stands because of how tightly packed the young trees grow, eventually thin through competition. But in the early years after fire, the landscape can become almost impenetrably dense with new growth. And serotiny is just one strategy. Another involves the smoke itself. When plant material burns, it releases thousands of chemical compounds into the air. Smoke is an incredibly complex mixture of gases, aerosols, particles of ash and soot, water vapor, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxides, and hundreds of organic compounds produced by the incomplete combustion of cellulose, lignin, and other plant materials. For a long time, people knew that smoke could stimulate germination in certain plants, but they didn't know which compound was responsible. In fire-prone regions like South Africa and southwestern Australia, indigenous peoples had observed for generations that certain wildflowers would bloom prolifically after fires, carpeting the landscape in brilliant colour. Botanists studying these phenomena knew that smoke could break seed dormancy in many species. But identifying the active compound among the thousands present in smoke proved extraordinarily difficult. The search involved collecting smoke from burning plant material, passing it through water to create what researchers called smoke water, and then using chromatography to separate this complex mixture into fractions. Each fraction was tested on seeds to see which ones promoted germination. It was painstaking work, requiring years of effort by research teams around the world. Then, in 2004, researchers working simultaneously in Australia and South Africa finally identified the key compound. They called it karakin, derived from karik, an Aboriginal Noongar word for smoke from the Perth area in Western Australia. Karakin-1, abbreviated as KR1, is a small organic molecule, a butanolide with a specific chemical structure that resembles a D-shaped ring. Specifically, it's 3-methyl-2-H-furo-2-3-C-pyrin-2-1, though thankfully the shorter name karakin is easier to remember. It's produced when cellulose and other carbohydrates undergo pyrolysis, the chemical decomposition caused by heat. When plant material burns, the sugars in cell walls break down and rearrange into karakin and related compounds. Several related karakins have since been discovered in smoke, designated Car2 through Car6, but Car1 appears to be the most abundant and most bioactive. The potency of karakins is remarkable. Seeds can respond to concentrations as low as 1 part per 10 billion, which is 10 to the negative 10th molar in chemistry terms. This sensitivity rivals that of plant hormones like auxin or gibberellin, substances we typically think of as being active at incredibly low concentrations. To put this in perspective, if you dissolved a single grain of sugar in an Olympic-sized swimming pool, you'd have a concentration of about 1 part per trillion. Karakin works at concentrations 100 times higher than that, but it's still an astonishingly dilute amount. A very small amount of smoke, washed into soil by rain, contains enough karakin to trigger germination in thousands of seeds. Karakins act as germination signals through a sophisticated biochemical pathway. When a karakin molecule encounters a seed, it binds to a receptor protein called KI2 located in the seed cells. This receptor is similar to receptors that detect strigolactones, another class of plant hormones, but it's specifically tuned to recognize karakins. The binding of karakin to KI2 triggers a cascade of cellular changes. Signal molecules are produced and move through the cell, eventually reaching the nucleus where they alter gene expression. Genes involved in germination are turned on, while genes maintaining dormancy are turned off. Hormone levels shift dramatically. Abscisic acid, a hormone that maintains seed dormancy and prevents germination under adverse conditions, decreases. Gibberellic acid, a hormone that promotes germination by activating enzymes that break down stored food reserves and weaken the seed coat, increases. The ratio between these two hormones is critical in determining whether a seed germinates or remains dormant. Karakin tips the balance toward germination, but it does so in a way that's also responsive to other environmental conditions like light and temperature, ensuring germination occurs only when multiple cues align. The embryo inside the seed begins to mobilize its stored reserves, converting starches to sugars, proteins to amino acids, fats to fatty acids, all the building blocks needed for growth. Enzymes secreted by the embryo weaken the seed coat from the inside. The seed imbibes water, swelling until the coat ruptures. The radicle, the embryonic root, emerges first, anchoring the seed to the soil. Then the shoot follows, pushing upward toward light. Within days or weeks, depending on the species and conditions, the seed has germinated, transforming from dormant to actively growing. This creates a remarkable group of plants called fire ephemerals or fire annuals. These species have evolved life cycles almost entirely synchronized with fire. They exist for years, sometimes decades, as dormant seeds buried in the soil seed bank. The seeds are protected from drying, from temperature extremes, from predators, by the soil itself. They're waiting in a state of suspended animation for the signal that fire has passed. When that signal arrives in the form of karakins washed into the soil by the first rains after fire, they germinate en masse. Thousands of seeds, representing years of accumulated seed production, all sprout within days of each other. The seedlings grow rapidly, taking advantage of the post-fire conditions. The abundant light, reduced competition, nutrient-rich ash. They flower prolifically, often within weeks of germination, producing stunning displays of colour. In Western Australia, species like Anigaxanthos and various orchids bloom in such profusion after fire that hillsides become carpets of red, yellow, and purple. Each plant produces seeds copiously before the dry season returns. Then the plants die, their annual life cycle complete, and their seeds return to the soil to wait for the next fire. Some individual seeds might germinate after the next fire in 5 or 10 years. Others might remain dormant for 20, 30, or even 50 years. A bet hedging strategy that ensures if one fire fails to produce successful recruitment, the species has seeds still waiting for the next opportunity. What's particularly interesting is that karakin sensitivity isn't limited to plants from fire-prone habitats. Researchers have found that seeds of many agricultural weeds, as well as crop plants like lettuce and tomato, respond to karakins. This suggests that the karakin signaling pathway is ancient and widespread among flowering plants. The fire ephemerals have simply fine-tuned an existing system, making themselves extremely sensitive to karakins so they can exploit the post-fire environment. There's also evidence that karakins may mimic an endogenous plant hormone that hasn't yet been fully identified. Plants have receptors for karakins even in species that never encounter fire. This suggests that karakins might be accidentally plugging into a signaling system that plants use for other purposes, perhaps related to stress detection or microbe communication. The full story of karakin signaling is still being unraveled, but what's clear is that it represents a sophisticated way for plants to detect fire and time their germination accordingly. Some plants go even further, using smoke as a cue for flowering rather than germination. In South Africa, certain species in the genus Cetanthus, known as fire lilies, will only flower after fire. They can remain vegetative for years, their bulbs growing underground but never sending up flower stalks. Then, after a fire passes through, they suddenly bloom, sometimes within weeks. The smoke compounds, likely including characins, trigger flowering. This ensures that the flowers appear at a time when pollinators might be abundant, attracted to the post-fire landscape, and when the opened landscape allows flowers to be more visible. The evolutionary logic is compelling. By using fire-specific cues like heat or smoke compounds to trigger germination or flowering, plants can ensure they're responding to a genuine fire event rather than other environmental fluctuations. A hot day might warm the soil, but it won't produce characins. Smoke from a distant fire might drift across the landscape, but it won't be accompanied by the soil heating or vegetation removal that characterizes a true fire passing through. The combination of cues, heat plus smoke plus seasonal timing creates a reliable signal that fire has occurred and that conditions are right for the next generation. But what about plants that are already established? Mature trees and shrubs that can't simply wait underground as seeds? For them, the challenge is survival, and their adaptations are equally remarkable. Stand in a grove of giant sequoias in California's Sierra Nevada, and you'll be surrounded by some of the largest living organisms on Earth. These trees can grow over 90 meters tall and live for more than 3,000 years. Their trunks can be 9 meters in diameter at the base, and if you place your hand against the bark, you'll feel something extraordinary. The outer bark of a mature giant sequoia can be up to half a meter thick, sometimes approaching 60 centimeters. This bark is deeply furrowed, creating a pattern of ridges and valleys across the surface. It's fibrous and soft, almost spongy when you press into it, and it has virtually no resin content. This bark is an adaptation to fire, one of the most effective pieces of biological insulation in the plant kingdom. The thick, fibrous structure is filled with tiny air pockets, and air is an excellent insulator. When fire passes through a sequoia grove, flames lick at the trunks, but the heat doesn't penetrate to the living tissue beneath. The outer bark might char, turning black on the surface, but the charred layer actually provides additional protection, forming a heat-resistant crust. The cambium, the thin layer of actively dividing cells just beneath the bark that keeps the tree alive by producing new wood and bark tissue, remains cool enough to survive. The bark also contains tannins, chemical compounds that make it naturally fire-resistant. Unlike many conifers, which produce sticky, flammable resins, sequoia bark is dry and doesn't readily ignite. When a fire heats the bark, it chars slowly, rather than bursting into flames. This slow charring process releases water vapor and gases that actually help cool the surrounding tissue, a kind of self-firefighting system built into the tree. Coast redwoods, the close relatives of giant sequoias, have similarly thick bark, though usually a bit thinner, ranging from about 12 to 30 centimeters in mature trees. Both species can survive fires that would kill virtually any other tree species in their habitat. In fact, fire scars on ancient sequoias, visible as blackened cavities at the base of their trunks, can be dated using tree ring analysis. Some trees have rings showing fire scars dating back 2,000 years or more, evidence of dozens of fires the tree has survived over its lifetime. But thick bark isn't only found in sequoias. Many fire-adapted trees around the world have evolved this trait. ponderosa pines in the western United States have thick, platy bark that peels away in jigsaw puzzle-like pieces. This structure allows the outer bark to heat and flake off during a fire, carrying heat away from the trunk. The cork oak of Mediterranean Europe, famous for providing natural cork, has extraordinarily thick, corky bark that provides excellent fire insulation. In fact, cork oak bark can be harvested sustainably, precisely because the tree can regenerate it, an adaptation originally evolved to deal with fire damage. Australian eucalyptus trees demonstrate a different strategy. Many species have what's called stringy bark or iron bark, thick layers of dead, fibrous bark hanging on the trunk. This might seem like it would make the tree more flammable, acting as a fuel ladder for fire, and in some cases it does. Eucalyptus bark can catch fire and burn while still attached to the tree. But here's where it gets interesting. The burning bark often peels away and falls to the ground, carrying the fire with it. Meanwhile, the living tissue beneath remains protected. Some eucalyptus species even shed their bark deliberately in strips and ribbons, a process that might help prevent the buildup of too much flammable material on the trunk. Not all eucalyptus species use thick bark, though. Some have smooth, thin bark that sheds annually. These species rely on a different adaptation entirely: the ability to resprout from specialized buds hidden beneath the bark and deep within the wood. The giant sequoia also has another crucial adaptation beyond its bark. It prunes itself. As a sequoia grows, its lower branches die and fall off naturally. This means that as the tree matures, the living canopy rises higher and higher above the ground, eventually reaching 20 or 30 meters up. Surface fires burning through the understory can't reach the green foliage where the tree does its photosynthesis. Even if the lower trunk is scorched, the tree's leaves remain untouched, and it can continue to grow. This self-pruning is common in fire-adapted conifers. Ponderosa pines do it. Longleaf pines in the southeastern United States do it. By the time these trees reach maturity, their canopies are elevated well above the reach of most surface fires, making them nearly fireproof as long as the fires remain low intensity. It's only when fires become severe, climbing into the canopy as crown fires, that these adaptations can be overwhelmed. But even trees with the thickest bark and the highest canopies can sometimes be killed by severe fire. When that happens, some species have one more trick. They can regrow from scratch. If you walk through an Australian eucalyptus forest a few months after a severe fire, you might see something that looks impossible. Blackened trunks, completely scorched, their bark burned away, their canopies consumed, every leaf incinerated. Dead, or so it would seem, but look closer. From the trunk itself, from the main branches, even from just beneath the soil at the base, bright green shoots are emerging. Hundreds of them, thousands of them, creating a halo of new growth around what appeared to be a corpse. These shoots are sprouting from epicormic buds, specialized structures that eucalyptus trees develop as an insurance policy against fire. The word epicormic comes from Greek roots meaning on the trunk, and that's exactly where these buds are located. But unlike typical buds that form at the tips of branches or in leaf axils, epicormic buds are embedded deep in the wood itself, beneath layers of bark, protected by the maximum thickness of insulation the tree can produce. The anatomy of eucormic buds in eucalyptus is extraordinary. Long strands of meristematic tissue collections of cells that retain the ability to divide and differentiate into any type of plant tissue, run vertically through the outer layers of wood and the inner layers of bark. These strands originate from buds that formed when the branch or trunk was very young, sometimes when it was just a seedling. As the tree grows and adds new wood each year, these original buds don't disappear. Instead, they persist, growing outward at the same rate the trunk grows, maintaining their position just beneath the bark. Each epicormic strand can produce multiple buds along its length. The strand itself is a thin ribbon of tissue, sometimes only a few cells wide, running parallel to the grain of the wood. Along this ribbon, at intervals, primordia form, which are the precursors to buds. A typical eucalyptus tree might have thousands of these bud-forming structures distributed throughout its trunk and major branches. One study estimated that a 21-meter-tall eucalyptus might have 7,000 epicormic strands, each capable of producing shoots if activated. Under normal conditions, these buds remain dormant. The tree's hormonal balance suppresses their growth. The actively growing shoot tips at the end of each branch produce a hormone called auxin that travels downward through the tree, telling epicormic buds to stay asleep. But when fire comes and the crown is killed, that hormonal suppression disappears. The epicormic buds wake up. Within days, they begin to grow, producing shoots that emerge through the burned bark. Because these buds are set deep in the wood, they can survive even intense heat at the surface. Within weeks after a severe fire, a eucalyptus forest can be covered in bright green growth, the trunks and branches of seemingly dead trees sprouting leaves. This is epicormic resprouting, and it's one of the most impressive fire adaptations in the plant kingdom. By maintaining the entire woody skeleton of the tree, the plant retains all the height growth, the root system, and the structural investment it had made before the fire. An epicormic resprouter can recover its canopy within a year or two, much faster than a seedling starting from scratch. Not all eucalyptus species can do this. In wet forests, where fires are very rare but extremely severe when they occur, some eucalyptus species have lost epicormic resprouting ability. These obligate seeders are killed by fire and must regenerate from seed, similar to lodgepole pines. But they compensate by producing enormous quantities of seed that they release after fire. Mountain ash, one of the world's tallest flowering plants, is an obligate seeder. After fire, thousands of seedlings establish, growing rapidly in the full sunlight and ash-enriched soil. Epicormic resprouting isn't unique to eucalyptus. Cork oak can resprout epicormically after fire. Coast redwoods can do it, though they also resprout from the base. Various oak species in fire-prone regions show this ability, but eucalyptus, particularly in Australian savannas and woodlands, where fires are frequent and intense, has refined epicormic resprouting to an extraordinary degree. Researchers estimate that a typical 21-meter tall eucalyptus might have 7,000 or more epicormic strands distributed through its trunk and branches, ready to produce new shoots if needed. The evolution of epicormic resprouting appears to be ancient in eucalyptus. Phylogenetic studies suggest it arose about 60 million years ago, around the time that Australia's climate was becoming more fire-prone. It gave eucalyptus a tremendous advantage in fire-dominated landscapes, allowing them to dominate Australian forests and woodlands in a way few other trees could. But there's another resprouting strategy, one that works even when the entire above-ground structure of the plant is destroyed, re-sprouting from below ground. Buried beneath a charred shrub in the California chaparral, hidden from view, is a woody swelling the size of a basketball. This structure, called a lignotuber, is a specialized storage organ packed with starches and protected meristems. It's essentially a bank of buds and energy reserves wrapped up in woody tissue and buried safely underground. When fire sweeps through and consumes everything above ground, killing the stems and leaves entirely, the lignotuber remains untouched. Soil is an excellent insulator. Even a thin layer of soil can keep underground organs cool during a fire. After the fire passes, buds on the lignotuber activate, sending up new shoots. These shoots grow rapidly, using the stored energy in the lignotuber, which can be substantial. A large lignotuber might contain enough carbohydrate reserves to support dozens of new shoots. Within a single growing season, a plant that was completely burned to the ground can regenerate a meter or more of new growth. Lignotubers are found in many unrelated plant groups, another example of convergent evolution. They're common in the eucalyptus family, in chaparral shrubs of California, in the fynbos of South Africa, and in various Mediterranean shrublands around the world. Young eucalyptus seedlings begin forming their lignotubers within the first year of life, creating this survival structure early. The advantage of a lignotuber is that it allows a plant to survive fires that are severe enough to kill even thick-barked trees. No matter how hot the fire burns above ground, the lignotuber remains safe below. The disadvantage is that the plant loses all its above-ground height and structure. A tree might take decades to regrow to its pre-fire height after resprouting from the base. For this reason, basal resprouting from lignotubers is most common in shrubs and small trees, species that don't grow very tall anyway. Some plants combine strategies. Many eucalyptus species have both epicormic buds and lignotubers. Young trees rely more heavily on lignotuber resprouting after fire. As they mature and develop thick bark and numerous epicormic buds, they shift toward epicormic resprouting, which allows them to maintain their height. Very old large trees might produce fewer lignotuber shoots and rely almost entirely on epicormic resprouting, having invested so much in height that losing it would be catastrophic for their competitive position. The shift from obligate seeding, being killed by fire and regenerating from seed, to resprouting strategies, or vice versa, has happened multiple times in evolutionary history. It's not a one-way street. In some lineages, resprouting appears to be the ancestral state, and loss of resprouting, becoming an obligate seeder, is the derived condition. This can happen when fire frequency increases to the point that a resprouter might be burned again before it's had time to build up enough reserves to resprout successfully. Obligate seeders can escape this trap by producing massive numbers of seeds after each fire, ensuring their next generation regardless of fire frequency. In other lineages, the opposite has occurred. Obligate seeding is ancestral, and resprouting has evolved as fire frequency increased. The evolutionary pressures are complex and depend on fire frequency, fire intensity, competition, herbivory, and many other factors. What's clear is that plants have explored many different solutions to the problem of surviving in fire-prone environments. And the diversity of strategies we see today represents millions of years of evolutionary experimentation. But some of the most successful fire survivors aren't trees or shrubs at all. They're grasses. A grass plant is built differently from a tree. Its growing points, the meristems that produce new leaves and stems, are located at the base of the plant, right at or even slightly below the soil surface. This is called a basal meristem, and it's one of the key adaptations that make grasses so successful in fire-prone habitats. When fire burns through a grassland, it consumes the leaves and stems, all the above-ground tissue. But the meristem, protected by its low position and by the insulating soil, survives. Within days after a fire, new leaves begin to emerge, photosynthesizing and rebuilding the plant. This ability to regrow rapidly after fire is why grasslands and savannas exist as stable ecosystems in many parts of the world. Without fire, trees would gradually invade and turn grasslands into forests. But with regular fire, trees are repeatedly top-killed, set back to ground level, while grasses recover immediately. Fire maintains the open structure of these ecosystems, preventing woody encroachment. African savannas are perhaps the most iconic fire-adapted grasslands on Earth. Covering vast areas of the continent, savannas are characterized by a continuous grass layer with scattered trees, usually acacias or other fire-tolerant species. These grasslands burn frequently, often annually or every few years during the dry season. The fires are started by lightning, or, increasingly, by humans managing the landscape. After a fire in an African savanna, the change is dramatic. Within a week, bright green shoots begin to emerge from the blackened ground. Within 2 weeks, the grassland can be lush again, the ash acting as fertilizer, enriching the soil with nutrients. Some grasses grow an inch or more per day in the weeks following fire. This rapid regrowth is fueled by carbohydrate reserves stored in the roots and by the improved nutrient availability from the ash. Research on savanna grasses has revealed sophisticated adaptations beyond simple basal meristems. Many species are perennials that live for decades, building extensive root systems that can extend several meters deep. These roots store energy and allow the plant to access water during dry periods. When fire removes the above-ground biomass, the plant isn't starting from zero. It has a massive underground infrastructure already in place. Studies in West African savannas have shown that the dominant perennial grass species there can live for over 80 years, some even exceeding 120 years. These ancient grasses persist through dozens of fires over their lifetimes, each time burning to the ground and regrowing. The stability of these grass communities depends on this long lifespan and the resilience provided by their below-ground reserves. Fire timing matters enormously for savanna grasses. Early dry season fires, when plants have finished their annual growth and set seed but haven't fully dried out, tend to be less intense and cause less damage to the root reserves. Late dry season fires, burning when everything is tinder dry, can be more severe and take a heavier toll on the plants. Research has shown that some grass species grow better with early season fires, while others tolerate late season fires better. The diversity of responses creates a complex mosaic where different fire timings maintain different communities. Fire also drives nutrient cycling in grasslands. When organic matter accumulates on the ground, nutrients become locked up in dead leaves and stems. Fire releases these nutrients back into the soil as ash, making them available for plants to take up. Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and other essential elements are all returned to the soil through burning. This rapid nutrient cycling combined with the removal of dead material that can suppress new growth, creates a pulse of productivity after fire. Interestingly, frequent fire can actually increase grass diversity in some systems. By preventing any single grass species from dominating, creating a dynamic disturbance regime, fire maintains space for multiple species with different fire sensitivities and recovery rates. Some species might do best in the first year after fire, exploiting the open space and high nutrients. Others might do better in the second or third year as competition intensifies. This temporal niche partitioning, driven by fire, allows more species to coexist than would be possible without fire. The relationship between fire and grazing is also critical in savannas. Large herbivores like zebras, wildebeest, and antelope are attracted to recently burned areas because the new grass growth is highly nutritious, more digestible, and higher in protein than old growth. This creates a positive feedback. Fire improves forage quality, attracting grazers, and grazing keeps fuel loads lower, potentially affecting the intensity of the next fire. In areas where grazing has been removed, fuel can accumulate to dangerous levels, leading to fires that are more intense than the system evolved with. Some grasses have even evolved specific traits that make them more flammable, essentially encouraging fire. Tall grasses with high oil content in their leaves burn readily. When they're abundant, they create conditions that favor more frequent fires, which in turn favor them over less fire-tolerant species. It's a kind of ecosystem engineering through flammability, plants shaping their environment to suit their own strategies. The arrival of invasive grass species in some regions has altered fire regimes dramatically. Bufflegrass, introduced to Australia from Africa, grows quickly and produces large amounts of flammable biomass. In ecosystems that historically burned infrequently, bufflegrass has increased fire frequency, creating a grass fire cycle that favors the invasive over native vegetation. This demonstrates how fire adaptations that evolved in one context can become invasive when introduced to a different fire regime. In North American prairies, before European settlement, fire maintained vast grasslands across the Great Plains. Bison and fire worked together, the bison grazing, creating a mosaic of heavily and lightly grazed areas, fire spreading more readily through the ungrazed patches. Lightning ignited fires in summer, and indigenous peoples set fires in spring and fall. The grasses, species like bluestem and switchgrass, were shaped by this fire regime. Suppression of fire in modern times has allowed woody plants to invade many former prairies, converting open grassland to shrubland or forest, a shift that has profound effects on biodiversity. Restoring fire to these landscapes is challenging because decades without fire have created fuel loads that can lead to fires more severe than the historical norm. Prescribed burning, carefully managed fires set under controlled conditions, attempts to restore a more natural fire regime while avoiding the danger of wildfire. For grasslands and savannas, this restoration of fire is often essential for maintaining the ecosystem. And grasslands aren't the only ecosystems where fire triggers remarkable responses in the soil itself. Beneath the surface of fire-prone landscapes, there's an invisible world of seeds waiting. In some ecosystems, the soil seed bank, the reservoir of dormant seeds buried in the top layers of soil, can contain tens of thousands of seeds per square meter. Many of these seeds can remain viable for years, decades, even centuries in some cases, lying dormant until the right conditions for germination arrive. For some species, those conditions are created specifically by fire. We've already discussed characins, the smoke compounds that trigger germination. But heat itself is also a germination cue for certain seeds. These seeds have hard, impermeable seed coats that prevent water from entering and breaking the seed's dormancy. The seed coat is a physical barrier, and breaking through it requires heat. When fire passes over the soil, it heats the surface layers. The heat pulse is brief but intense, sometimes reaching temperatures well over 100 degrees Celsius at the very surface. Just a centimetre or two below, protected by the insulating properties of soil, temperatures might only reach 40 or 50 degrees. This is perfect for heat-stimulated germination. Seeds with hard coats, common in the pea family and in many Australian plants, have evolved so that specific temperatures cause small cracks or weak points in the seed coat to split open. Water can then enter, the seed imbibes moisture, and germination begins. The specific temperature required varies by species, often between 60 and 120 degrees Celsius, but the principle is the same. Fire-generated heat breaks the physical dormancy of the seed. This is particularly common in legumes, members of the pea family. In Australian ecosystems, hard-seeded legumes might remain dormant in the soil for 50 years or more, waiting for fire. After a fire, they germinate en masse, fixing nitrogen from the atmosphere and enriching the soil, contributing to the post-fire pulse of productivity. In African savannas, certain acacia species have similar heat-stimulated germination. The seeds lie in the soil, protected from drying and predation by their hard coats, until fire arrives and cracks them open. The evolutionary advantage is clear. These plants time their germination to coincide with the optimal conditions created by fire. But there's a risk. If the fire is too hot, if it burns too long in one spot, if the fuel load is exceptionally heavy, then the seeds can be cooked and killed. Research has shown that there's a narrow window of heat intensity that promotes germination without causing mortality. Too little heat and the seed coat doesn't crack. Too much and the embryo inside is killed. This sensitivity to fire intensity means that changes in fire regime can have dramatic effects on seed bank dynamics. In areas where fuel loads have built up due to fire suppression and then burn in megafires, the heat pulse might be so intense that it kills the seed bank rather than germinating it. This can lead to recruitment failure, situations where, after fire, very few or no seedlings of a species appear, even though the soil seed bank was present before the fire. The smoke compounds add another layer of complexity. Some seeds respond to heat, some to smoke, and some to both. The combination provides a more reliable signal that fire has occurred. A hot day might heat the soil surface, but it won't produce smoke. Smoke from a distant fire might drift into an area, but it won't be accompanied by intense soil heating. Only when both cues are present can the seeds be certain that a fire has passed directly over them, creating the conditions suitable for germination. After germination, the post-fire environment presents both opportunities and challenges. The nutrients in ash provide a boost, and the removal of litter exposes mineral soil, giving seeds good contact with the ground. But the exposed surface also means higher temperatures and faster moisture loss. Seedlings must establish quickly, growing roots deep enough to access stable moisture before the soil surface dries out completely. In Mediterranean climates, where fire typically occurs in late summer or fall, the arrival of winter rains after fire is critical. The seeds germinate with the first rains, and the seedlings grow through the cool, wet winter and spring, establishing before the stress of the next summer dry season. The timing is essential. Seeds that germinate too early, before adequate rain, will die. Seeds that germinate too late might not have enough time to grow a sufficient root system before the dry season arrives. This is where the Banksia seed separator comes in again, that clever bit of tissue that delays seed release until after the first rains following fire. By ensuring seeds are released when moisture is present, the plant improves the odds that its offspring will germinate at the right time. And it's not just plants that respond to fire. Animals too have learned to read the landscape, to detect fire, and to use it. When fire sweeps through a forest, most animals flee. Birds take to the air, flying ahead of the flames or moving to unburned patches. Mammals run, their sensitive noses detecting smoke from kilometers away, giving them time to escape. Smaller creatures burrow, retreating into the soil or under logs where they're protected from the heat. Reptiles and amphibians seek shelter in rock crevices, burrows, or wet areas. For most animals, fire is a danger to avoid. But within hours or days after a fire passes, animals begin to return. And for some species, recently burned areas become highly attractive. Certain beetles, for instance, are specialists of burned wood. The black fire beetle, found in western North America, has infrared receptors on its body that can detect the heat of a fire from more than 10 kilometers away. The beetle flies toward the smoke plume, arriving at a burn site sometimes, while embers are still glowing. It seeks out freshly charred trees, where it lays its eggs in the bark. The larvae develop in the dead wood, feeding on fungi that colonize the burned timber. These beetles are so attuned to fire that they've been observed landing on warm objects that aren't even fire-related, like the metal hoods of cars parked near burns. Their infrared sensors are powerful enough that they can detect slight temperature differences, guiding them to the resources they need. Birds also respond quickly to fire. Some species, particularly woodpeckers, are attracted to burned forests because dead and dying trees harbor abundant insects. The black-backed woodpecker, found in coniferous forests of North America, preferentially nests in recently burned stands. It feeds on wood-boring beetles and other insects that colonize dead trees. In fact, populations of black-backed woodpeckers can increase dramatically after large fires as they move into the burned area and breed. Raptors, hawks, and eagles are often seen hunting around fires and in recently burned areas. The removal of ground vegetation makes small mammals more visible, creating better hunting conditions. Deer and other large herbivores are attracted to burned areas because the new grass growth that emerges within days of fire is highly nutritious, richer in protein and more digestible than old growth. Studies have shown that elk, for example, will preferentially graze in burned meadows over unburned ones. This creates an interesting dynamic. Fire opens up habitat, creating a pulse of resources, food and shelter that attracts certain animals. But the severity of the fire matters enormously. Low to moderate severity, fires that burn the understory but leave many trees alive create a mosaic of dead and living trees, open and closed canopy areas that supports high biodiversity. High severity fires that kill all trees across large areas create a different habitat, one that favors different species but might be less diverse overall. Research using camera traps in California has documented how wildlife responds to fire over time. In the first months after a fire, generalist species like coyotes and bobcats remain or even increase in numbers, exploiting the changed conditions. More specialized species, like mountain lions that rely on dense cover to ambush prey, may leave burned areas and return only after vegetation has regrown sufficiently, which can take years or decades, depending on the severity. Deer show complex responses. They're attracted to the new forage in burned areas, but need nearby unburned forest for cover. The ideal is a mosaic, burned patches interspersed with unburned refuges, creating edge habitat that provides both food and shelter. Studies tracking mule deer across large landscapes have found that while burned areas improve overall habitat quality at the landscape scale, deer often avoid the most severely burned patches at finer scales, preferring areas where fire was moderate. Small mammals like mice, voles, and shrews can be heavily impacted by fire, especially species that depend on dense ground cover. Their populations often decline immediately after fire as habitat is lost, but recovery can be rapid as grasses and shrubs regrow. Within a few years, small mammal populations often return to pre-fire levels, or even exceed them, benefiting from the increased plant productivity in the years following fire. Amphibians and reptiles show mixed responses. Some species are killed by fire, particularly slow-moving species like salamanders and turtles. Others survive by sheltering in moist refuges or burrows. After fire, the changed habitat structure can favor some species over others. Lizards that prefer open, sunny basking sites might benefit from the removal of canopy cover, while forest floor specialists might decline. One of the most important aspects of post-fire animal response is the concept of fire refugia, patches within a burn that escape fire entirely or burn at low severity. These refugia serve as sources from which animals can recolonize the burned areas. A landscape with frequent, low-intensity fires tends to create many small refugia, while rare, high-severity megafires can eliminate refugia across vast areas, making recovery more difficult. In Australian eucalyptus forests, where fires can be severe, hollow-bearing trees are critical refugia. These old trees, with cavities created by rot or fire damage, provide shelter for dozens of animal species, everything from small marsupials to parrots to bats. When fire kills these hollow trees, their loss can persist for centuries because it takes a very long time for new hollows to form. This creates a legacy effect where the loss of fire refugia from one severe fire impacts wildlife for many generations. The timeline of recovery varies dramatically by ecosystem and fire severity. In grasslands and savannas, where plants recover within days or weeks and the structure of the ecosystem isn't fundamentally altered, animal communities can bounce back within a single growing season. In forests, especially after high-severity crown fires, recovery can take decades. The forest must regrow from scratch, progressing through stages of shrubs, saplings, young forest, and eventually mature forest. Different animal species are associated with each stage. This creates a kind of successional sequence in animal communities that parallels the plant succession. In the first years after fire, open habitat specialists thrive. Birds that nest on the ground or in low shrubs, mammals that prefer grassland or early successional habitats, reptiles that need open areas for basking. As the forest matures, These species are replaced by forest specialists, birds that nest in tree canopies, mammals that need closed forests, species adapted to the shaded, cooler conditions under a full canopy. Fire thus maintains a diversity of habitats across the landscape through time. No single patch stays the same. Each burn creates a new trajectory of recovery. Across a large landscape, you'll have patches at every stage of succession, from recently burned to old growth, and this patchwork supports a greater diversity of species than a uniform landscape would. This is the concept of pyrodiversity promoting biodiversity. By creating habitat heterogeneity through variation in fire frequency, intensity, and pattern, fire maintains landscapes that support more species than would be possible without fire. It's a compelling argument for the importance of fire in ecosystems, and a challenge in regions where fire has been suppressed. Because when fire is removed from fire-adapted ecosystems, the consequences can be severe. For much of the 20th century, fire suppression was the dominant approach to wildfire management in many parts of the world, particularly in the United States. The goal was simple: put out every fire as quickly as possible to protect timber, grazing land, and human property. Firefighters became incredibly effective at this. Large fires were attacked with planes, helicopters, thousands of personnel, and enormous budgets. For decades, this appeared to work. Fire-prone forests stopped burning. People felt safer. But ecosystems that evolved with frequent fire began to change in the absence of fire. In ponderosa pine forests of the western United States, which historically burned every 5 to 15 years with low-intensity surface fires that cleared out understory vegetation and killed small trees, fire suppression allowed decades of fuel to accumulate. Saplings that would have been killed by frequent fires survived and grew into dense thickets. Dead branches, fallen trees, and accumulated needles built up on the forest floor. What had been open, park-like forests with large, widely spaced trees and grassy understories became dense, cluttered forests filled with ladder fuels, vegetation that allows fire to climb from the ground into the canopy. When fires finally did occur in these altered forests, they behaved differently. Instead of burning gently along the ground, fires climbed into the canopy, becoming crown fires that killed even the large, thick-barked pines that had previously survived. The structure of the forest had changed so much that the tree's fire adaptations were no longer sufficient. In giant sequoia groves, the story is similar. Historically, fires burned through sequoia groves every 15 to 25 years, clearing understory vegetation and creating ideal conditions for sequoia regeneration. Fire suppression disrupted this pattern. When fires returned, whether as wildfires or as prescribed burns intended to restore fire, they sometimes encountered fuel loads so heavy that they burned with unprecedented intensity. In recent years, severe fires have killed thousands of mature giant sequoias, trees that had survived dozens of previous fires. The difference is the intensity. With thicker fuel loads, fires burn hotter and longer, overwhelming even the impressive fire resistance of sequoia bark. This is one of the great ironies of fire suppression. By attempting to protect forests from fire, we've made them more vulnerable to catastrophic fire. The same pattern has played out in chaparral shrublands, in pine forests, in mixed conifer forests across the American West. Fuel accumulation changes fire behavior from something the ecosystem can handle to something that causes fundamental change or even destruction. Climate change is exacerbating this problem. Rising temperatures, earlier snowmelt, longer droughts, and shifts in precipitation patterns are creating conditions that favor larger, more intense fires. The fire season is lengthening. Areas that historically were too wet to burn regularly are drying out and becoming fire-prone. The combination of accumulated fuels from decades of suppression and hotter, drier conditions from climate change is creating what researchers call megafires. Fires that burn with extreme severity across enormous areas, sometimes hundreds of thousands of acres. These megafires present challenges that many fire adaptations can't overcome. Serotinous cones can be destroyed rather than opened if the heat is too intense. Seeds in the soil can be killed rather than germinated. Epicormic buds can be cooked even beneath thick bark if the fire burns hot enough and long enough. Entire landscapes can be converted from forest to shrubland or grassland because regeneration fails after severe fire. In Australia, the Black Summer Fires of 2019 to 2020 burned more than 18 million hectares, an area larger than many countries. The fires were so severe that even fire-adapted eucalyptus forests experienced mass mortality. Ancient trees, centuries old, were killed. In some areas, the fires returned to places that had burned just a few years earlier, catching re-sprouting trees before they'd had time to rebuild their reserves or produce seed. This double hit effect can push even resilient species toward local extinction. The challenges are immense. Restoring fire to landscapes that haven't burned in decades requires careful planning. Prescribed burns must be conducted under precise conditions: weather, humidity, wind, to ensure they burn with low to moderate intensity, reducing fuels without causing the severe effects of wildfire. But there are constraints. Smoke from prescribed fires affects air quality, creating health concerns for nearby communities. Liability issues arise if a prescribed burn escapes containment, and there simply aren't enough trained personnel or resources to treat all the landscapes that need it. Yet the alternative, continuing suppression and risking megafires, is increasingly untenable. Researchers and land managers are advocating for a paradigm shift from universal fire suppression to fire management that includes prescribed burning, managed wildfire, allowing lightning-ignited fires to burn under acceptable conditions, and mechanical thinning to reduce fuels in areas where fire can't be safely used. For fire-adapted species, the restoration of appropriate fire regimes is critical. Without fire, serotinous pines can't regenerate. Their seed banks hang in the canopy, waiting for fire that never comes, while shade-tolerant competitors grow up beneath them. Eventually, the pines die of old age, and with no fire to trigger seed release, the species disappears. From the site, grasslands become woodlands, then forests, losing the open structure that prairie species require. Fire-stimulated flowering species wait for fires that don't arrive, their populations gradually declining through natural attrition without the recruitment pulse that fire would provide. In some ecosystems, the changes may already be irreversible. If a forest has been converted to grassland by severe fire and no seed source remains nearby, the forest may not return. If an invasive grass has created a new fire regime with more frequent fires than native plants can tolerate, the system may shift to a new state dominated by the invader. These are called alternative stable states, ecosystems that have crossed a threshold and settled into a different configuration. But there are also reasons for hope. Ecosystems are resilient. Given time and appropriate management, many can recover. Post-fire monitoring has shown that even after severe fires, regeneration often occurs, sometimes from unexpected sources. Seeds blown in from distant sources, resprouting from underground structures thought to have been killed, recruitment from tiny refugia that survived the fire. In California, after the severe fires of recent years, researchers have documented surprising resilience. Coast redwoods are resprouting even after fires that seem to have killed them. Sequoia seedlings are establishing in areas that burned severely, taking advantage of the open conditions, even though many parent trees were killed. The landscape is changing, but life persists, adapting even to these extreme events. Indigenous peoples around the world have maintained fire-adapted landscapes for thousands of years through cultural burning, the deliberate use of fire to manage ecosystems. In Australia, Aboriginal burning created mosaic landscapes with patches at different stages of succession. In North America, Native American burning maintained prairies, oak savannas, and open forests. These traditional practices are being rediscovered and, in some places, restored, offering insights into how to live with fire rather than fighting against it. The future of fire-adapted ecosystems depends on our ability to work with fire rather than trying to eliminate it. This means accepting that fire is necessary, managing it carefully, and allowing fire-adapted species to express the full range of adaptations they've evolved over millions of years. When we look at a landscape shortly after fire, we might see devastation, blackened trees, ash-covered ground, the apparent destruction of everything living. But if we understand the biology, if we know the adaptations at work, we see something else entirely. We see seeds being released in their millions, drifting on the wind to find their perfect germination sites in the ash. We see smoke compounds soaking into the soil, waking ancient seeds from their dormancy. We see epicormic buds pushing through bark, lignotubers sending up shoots, grasses regrowing from their protected bases. We see beetles arriving to colonize dead wood, woodpeckers following to feast on the beetles, deer coming to eat the nutritious new growth. We see an ecosystem not dying but transforming, not ending but renewing. We see life that has turned one of nature's most destructive forces into an opportunity, a trigger, a necessary event. We see the elegant solutions that evolution has crafted over deep time, solutions that allow forests to persist for millions of years in the presence of fire, that maintain grasslands against the encroachment of trees, that create diversity through disturbance. The relationship between fire and life is one of the most fascinating in all of ecology. It challenges our assumptions about what's harmful and what's beneficial, about destruction and creation, about death and life. It shows us that nature is more complex, more adaptive, and more resilient than we might imagine. A forest that burns is not a forest dying. It's a forest in the midst of a process, one phase of a cycle that has been turning for longer than our species has existed. The seeds know this. The trees know this. The grasses know this. And now, perhaps, we're beginning to understand it too. If you found peace in tonight's exploration, if these stories of resilience and adaptation have given you something to wonder about as you drift towards sleep, consider leaving a like on this video. Subscribe to Bedtime Biology so you can continue these quiet journeys through the natural world. And down in the comments, let me know where you're watching from tonight. Are you in a fire-prone region yourself? somewhere that knows the smell of smoke and the sight of blackened landscapes? Or are you somewhere wetter, cooler, where fire is rare, but still part of the ancient memory of the land? I love hearing from you all, learning where our community stretches across this beautiful, burning, ever-renewing planet. Until next time, rest well, and remember that even in the ashes, life is preparing its next great flourishing.